Hey number ones, welcome to Metatron's Academy. Let's check this video out because it has a very interesting topic. So today I saw this video from the channel Anubis, how to standardize a language, and it's from 4 weeks ago. And I see Italy, Greece and Turkey. Hey, let's check it out.
Italy didn't always speak Italian. There wasn't always just one variety of Greek, and Turkey used to speak a very different form of Turkish. These are all examples of standardized languages.
And even though a standardized Italian exists, absolutely, most people still use their regional varieties and their dialects. I'll get back to that word in a minute.
Dialects specifically chosen, molded, or even created to be the lingua franca of a linguistically diverse country. So what I want to know is, in a country with so many diverse dialects, how do you pick one to be the standard language of the entire nation?
To be a little pedantic here, not trying to attack, of course, I will let him finish his points before agreeing or disagreeing, but I do want to underline and answer his question. How do you pick one dialect and turn it into the standardized version? You don't. What I mean by that, if we look at the little animation he did here, and this is not me correcting him, I still don't know if that's what he means, but it's me just clarifying things for the general audience. Check this part out.
Languages. Dialects specifically chosen...
Right, so he took Toscano, which is one of the dialects in Italy, and molded it into Italiano. Now, first, we could talk of whether Toscano, Napoletano, Siciliano, Lombardo, Veneto are these dialects or are these actual languages. That will take us into the realm of sociolinguistics. Personally, I think they should be considered regional languages, but it is absolutely true that in Italy we call them I dialetti. Everyone calls them dialetti. And it's such a long discussion and debate that it would take half this video, so perhaps for another day. But I do want to end that point by quoting linguists that say that the difference between a language and a dialect is that a dialect is a language without an army and a navy. Italiano is not Toscano transformed into Italiano. Italiano is based on a variety of Toscano, but they are still very different. What I mean by that is that if we open a map of Tuscany and we look at all the different very famous cities, Firenze, Arezzo, Siena, Grosseto, Pisa, Lucca, Livorno, well, all of these sound different. It's all Toscano, they all speak Toscano, but within the Toscano language at this point, there are lots of different varieties. Some of these towns sound closer, others don't. They sound quite different. You can still tell that they're from Tuscany, but they sound quite different. So in reality, it's most likely educated Florentine, and some people say Sienese, that became the basis that was used in order to create an entirely different language, which is Italian, based on Tuscan and some additions of other languages, including Sicilian, but it isn't the same as Tuscan. In other words, as a native speaker, I can immediately pinpoint someone if they speak any form of Toscano, and I can point the finger and say, oh, that person is from Florence, immediately. I cannot do that with a trained voice actor who just speaks standard Italian. At that point, I cannot place them. There is a massive difference, and the difference isn't just about pronunciation, accent, and intonation, but also vocabulary usage and sometimes grammar. A similar thing happens in China, when we do have Mandarin Chinese in the sense of standard, which is called Putonghua. But at the same time, even though that's based on Beijing, the dialect of Beijing, it isn't the same as Beijinghua. There are major differences. Putonghua is going to be closer to Beijinghua than it is to, for example, the way they speak in Nanjing, the way they speak in Xi'an, Sichuan, and of course, if we go outside of the Mandarin speaking zone, I mean, why are we even talking about it? But similarly to how in Italian we have Florentine accent, but we also have Sienese, as we have described. Well, even here in China, if you hear people from Harbin, even further north, they sound quite close to standard too. So usually there are differences, but it's not that you take one dialect and copy paste it and just say, well, now this is the standard language based on that variety. But it does have some modifications, and sometimes they're quite severe.
Molded or even created to be the lingua franca of a linguistically diverse country. So what I want to know is, in a country with so many diverse dialects, how do you pick one to be the standard language of the entire nation? And furthermore, how do you standardize it?
Good question.
This video is brought to you by LingoPie. Probably the best example of this kind of story is the question, why does Italy speak Italian? Which sounds like the dumbest question ever, but bear with me here.
No, it's actually a very good question if you know what you're talking about, so I appreciate that he's asking it.
The usual story regarding the evolution of the Romance languages goes something like this. The Romans spoke Latin, then conquered the known world and made everyone under their rule also speak Latin, but then their empire fell, leaving all the regional varieties to split off into different dialects, and eventually evolve into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, oh yeah, and Romanian. That story, however, well, I mean it's completely true, but it leaves out a lot of the details.
Correct, and I appreciate that he used just the word Latin and that he didn't say Vulgar Latin, because that would have opened a whole can of worms with me.
This is a map of the dialects spoken across Italy,
Yes.
still to this day. As the history fandom knows, Italy spent well over 1,000 years divided among different kingdoms, city-states, weird trade republics, and external empires. So this division isn't particularly shocking. In fact, I made a whole video about this earlier this year, in which I also talked about this story, but that video was about history and geography, so I didn't really focus on the language side.
Maybe I could react to that video, but over on my main channel, Metatron, since that's the one that is usually focused on history, civilization, and that sort of stuff. For those who are new here, I speak Standard Italian, and I also speak Sicilian variety since I'm a native from Palermo. My dad, however, is from the northeast, Udine specifically, so I'm very familiar. I don't speak his dialect, but I'm very familiar with it.
As much. Some of the most widely spoken dialects, even to this day, are Sicilian, Sardinian, and Venetian, but they're not alone. These dialects, however, aren't dialects of Italian, or at least not the Italian we know to this day, but rather a family of closely related dialects that all descended directly from Vulgar Latin.
Oh, God, crying out loud. What can of worms it is, then? Before I attack the argument viciously, which I will, I do want to say, I want to give him some points, okay? I want to give him some credit. The theory that is launching now with the Sicilian, Venetian, Sardinian, maybe even other dialects within or regional language variety, linguistic varieties within Italy that do not derive from, they're not actually dialects of Italian, but they are dialects of Latin. I've been pushing for this for a while, like years, and that is absolutely my position. So I'm actually very happy that someone else is saying it, because I've been saying it a lot, and it is absolutely true. It's not like Venetian, Sicilian, Sardinian, Neapolitan, they predate the creation of Standard Italian, so of course they cannot be, just as a matter of deductive logic, they cannot be dialects of something that didn't even exist when they existed already. They do come from Latin, and then they are also exposed to other languages. For instance, usually northern languages tend to have influence from like German and French and other languages, depending on where you're from. And then southern languages and regional varieties instead tend to have stronger influences from Spanish, from Arabic, from Norman French, which is of course different from standard Parisian French due to the history. But yeah, so I agree with him on this, and I give him props for saying it. That's a very subtle thing to notice, particularly if you're not a native, so I appreciate him for that. Props. But he said Vulgar Latin, so let's debunk that once again. Alright, so here we are. As you can see, this is usually what he's quoting. So I'm not saying that he didn't do research. I'm sure he did a lot of research, but unfortunately, sometimes when we do research as content creators, we have to remember that we shouldn't just parrot information because it has been said multiple times by other people, because that's how myths get established. Many people repeat it, then we parrot it, but we have to dive into the sources ourselves, which I'm sure he does. But he didn't with this one, because he's still parroting the Vulgar Latin nonsense. Once again, I'm not attacking him, I'm attacking the argument. What is this problem? The problem here is the fact that, yes, we have Latin, but then as you see, this idea, this hypothesis that now people repeat is that Latin was divided in classical Latin, which was spoken by the elite, by the ruling classes, by the poets, by the emperors, and what have you, learned people, but then this one died out, and because no one spoke it anymore and it died without any siblings linguistically. But then you have Vulgar Latin, which is a variety, another language, completely different language that was spoken by the people, and this Vulgar Latin is the one that actually gave birth to Sardinian, continental Romance languages, Italian, Sicilian, whatever, all the other French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese. So all of the Romance languages come from Vulgar Latin, but they do not technically come from Classical Latin. That is absolute, complete, utter nonsense. Here is why. Both Classical Latin and Vulgar Latin are Latin. This is only a matter of their different register. It is the exact same thing with modern languages. Let's take English as an example, since many of you are probably Anglophone or speak English. Would you say that a professor or a scientist, an academic, or even a TV personality, or in general a person who is very educated, are they speaking classical English, which is a completely different language, as opposed to people on the streets that speak an everyday, and not even going into like Cockney or that sort of, no, just people that speak normally every day, but perhaps don't use very proper or extremely complicated vocabulary, or just don't do poetry, but are just speaking the language. Are they speaking vulgar English, which is a separate language? Therefore, in 1,000 years, when you'll have all of these new languages that are spoken, that derive from what? They don't derive from classical English, which was the language of the learnt, but they come directly from vulgar English. It's nonsense. It's all English. They're just different registers. Likewise, it was all Latin, and there is no differentiation it makes absolutely zero sense to say that all of this comes from Vulgar Latin, but not from classical Latin. Zero sense. Nothing. There is no basis to utilize as evidence or foundation of this. There is no such thing as Vulgar Latin. I will defend that point until the end of time.
This, therefore, posed quite a bit of a problem in the late 19th century, when the disparate kingdoms and trade republics were reunited into the Kingdom of Italy, an Italian nation in need of a common Italian language.
Yeah.
The roots of what is now the Italian language arguably date back to the 14th century, with the works of Dante Alighieri. Dante was from Florence, and thus spoke the Tuscan dialect.
Yeah.
However, many of his writings also incorporated words and phrases from various southern dialects.
Yep.
The popularity of the...
Very good. Yeah, he does do his research, as I say. One of those dialects was Sicilian, by the way, because Sicilian had a very well-established poetry school, Sicilian school of poetry, extremely important at the time.
Divine Comedy, in addition to the Tuscan dialect's more middle-of-the-road characteristics between north and south, led to this particular dialect gaining traction among the educated elites of Italian societies, which 400 years later gave the newly unified Italian nation a clear choice for the common dialect. However, one problem still remained: getting the poors on board with the idea. Upon unification, only 3% of the Italian population spoke Dante's Italian, and after World War II, this had...
Well, it wouldn't be Dante's Italian, though. Let's make this clear. The Divine Comedy, La Divina Commedia di Dante Alighieri, is medieval Italian. So it's not as different as Old English is to modern English. That's even more separated and difficult to understand. But it does sound medieval, because it is late medieval. So of course the population didn't speak that specific version. So just to give you an idea, this is the first canto of the Divine Comedy, Hell, Inferno. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura che la diritta via era smarrita. If we look at, for example, these passages here, I can understand it as a modern Italian. There are some cases, though, in which it's harder to understand, and I do need a dictionary or like some kind of, usually at the bottom of the pages, because we study this in high school, and usually like at the bottom of the page they do translate into modern Italian those words that are unrecognizable, but it's not that many. But what's really different is the way he says things, because it sounds extremely medieval. It sounds old. For instance, ai, quanto a dir qual era e cosa dura. No one would say it like this. It means, to tell you what it was, it's really hard. It's how you would translate it in English. I guess I'm just doing it like this now. I didn't look at an official translation in English. But I would never speak like this. It would make me sound like, yes, my liege, I ask of thee. That's what it would sound like, just to give you an idea. Esta, no one says this anymore. It's questa. Selva, for forest, no one really uses that anymore. It's foresta. Tante amara che poco più morte, ma per trattar del ben chi vi trovai. It's beautiful. It's not how we speak. It's gorgeous, though. Could you imagine, like, if someone asks, hey, how did you get, like, this sentence here? Oh my gosh, my Italian subscribers are gonna love this one. But could you imagine? This one means, I don't know how I entered it, right? He's talking about the forest. But imagine if someone asked, like, if I'm inside a supermarket, but it was supposed to be closed still, and I tell you on the phone, Io non so ben ridir com'ive entrai, tant'era pieno di sonno a quel punto che la verace via abbandonai. Oh my god, they would call an ambulance on me. They would think I need professional help. It does sound really nice though.
It only increased to 20%. The new Italian constitution in 1948 enshrined the right to education, but what really cemented the dominance of the Italian language in the 20th century was the advent of commercial television.
Sure.
Over the centuries, this dialect also absorbed words and phrases from the various dialects. These loanwords include everything from regionally specific things, like panettone from Milan, to even the greeting ciao from Venetian, likely derived from the word schiavo for slave, as
Yeah, I heard of that etymology. I haven't double-checked it, but yeah. Ciao.
in your humble servant, Francesco. Thus, the story of Italian shows one
Ciao, Francesco.
way to linguistically unite a country split among hundreds of dialects. Just pick the most fashionable dialect. Similar things also happened in France with the dominance of the northerly langues d'oïl, in Spain with Castilian, and most particularly half a world away in Indonesia with the modern Bahasa Indonesia,
I don't know anything about Indonesian.
derived from Riau Malay due to its widespread use among traders from the Malacca Sultanate, and actually more commonly spoken by its citizens as a second language. But finding a common tongue for a linguistically diverse country isn't the only reason for human players to mod the game's language files. Now, if you want to learn Italian, or any language really, the best way in my opinion is to, of course, go somewhere that speaks your target language.
I agree with him 100%.
Total immersion. But that's generally
Oh,
expensive.
this is the sponsor section. I hadn't even noticed. Okay, so let's see what we got. He's going to speak about Greek. So that was the Italian part. Then he's going to speak about Turkish. And then, all right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave, because I never react to the entire video in order to encourage my audience to click the link in the description or in the pinned comment to go and finish the video up. Let's see a little bit the Greek part. I'll skip completely the Turkish part, which is a significant chunk of this video. And then I'll just give my personal conclusions when it comes to the presentation.
Speaking of Malacca, in Greece, there is only one Greek
Did he
language.
say Malacca?
Speaking of Malacca, in Greece, there is only one Greek language, spoken throughout the entire country, give or take a couple isolated dialects spoken by a few thousand people each. In ancient Greece, however, the Hellenic family was a bit more numerous, as several closely related dialects populated the shores of the Aegean. These included everything from the Attic-Ionic group associated with Athens and the Ionian city-states, to the Doric group spoken by Sparta, to the Aeolic group spoken in Thebes and Lesbos, to the geographically split Arcado-Cypriot group. But upon the conquest of Alexander the Great's father, Philip II, with most of Greece under his rule, it was the prestigious Attic dialect that became the official language of the Macedonian courts.
I always find this interesting that, of course, we speak of Greece as a united place, but clearly when you look at it from a historical perspective, they are city-states, so it's only normal that the way they speak, the way they think, their laws, the legislative approaches to a lot of different aspects of both common life, criminal life, sexuality, these things do differ a lot between the city-states. In a way, I think the ancient Greeks, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the ancient Greeks, if you were to ask, they considered themselves to be all Greek, just in a situation where they had a common enemy. So Greece has been invaded, then we Greeks are brothers, we fight them back. But then when the common enemy is gone, the common foreign enemy is gone, then they start fighting each other again, the city-states and all the wars and that kind of stuff. At that point, your allegiance is to your local city-state. If you're Athenian, your allegiance is with Athens against Sparta, imagine, if that's what we are discussing. And also, I love the discussion of colonies, like the, Syracuse, for instance, in Sicily, being Sicilian, and how powerful that one became, up to a point where it was rivaling the great polis of Greece. But that's history for the other channel, I suppose.
When Alexander later conquered the Persian Empire in a way that people thought was pretty S-tier, Attic Greek would quickly morph into a new dialect known as Kine, literally meaning common, which eventually became the lingua franca of the Greek empires during the Hellenistic Age. Wait, why is there still a lot of time before the Turkish chapter? I already did the ad. As the flags ruling over the eastern Mediterranean changed, Kine Greek slowly evolved into Medieval Greek, which itself began to re-diverge into several dialects under Ottoman rule, with Greek speakers in Crete, Cyprus, and the Pontus region often unable to understand the dialect that had evolved in mainland Greece, what we simply know as Modern Greek. Within Greece itself, communication wasn't really an issue. However, many of the architects of the modern Greek nation came to the agreement that ancient Greece was really freaking cool. Thus, when the Hellenic
Well, I agree with that.
Republic was recognized as an independent nation, the nation instead adopted a dialect called Kasarevosa, a sort of combination of the modern Demotic and the dialects of antiquity. The new nation used this purified form for official affairs, and within its borders the program was largely a success. However, Greece itself at the time only held 800,000 Greek speakers, with 2 million more outside their borders, mainly in the Ionian Isles, which were under British control at the time, and in the regions still under the Ottoman Empire.
I thought he said United States. United States of the United States of
which
the
were under
Ionian.
British control at the time, and in the regions still under the Ottoman Empire. Moreover, while the dialect was successfully put into use in government, the average Ioannis still would have used Demotic in their day-to-day life.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me though, because as I say, even in the Italian situation, which of course I can speak of much better than I can when it comes to the evolution of Greek, I could make an episode myself on that, but I have to, of course, work with the full team when it comes to that, whereas when we're speaking Italian, I can just tell you. In Italy, even today, we have a standard language. We absolutely, and it's very beautiful. I think Standard Italian is the most beautiful sounding language. And whenever you watch a movie in Italian, or if you see like anime that has been dubbed in Italian, that's the language you're hearing. But people use their regional varieties a lot, and they also speak Italian, but with an accent, a regional accent. So in reality, in Italy, you have 3 layers, 3 tiers, we could say. You have the regional dialect or regional language, which is completely different. Then you have Italian, but spoken with a strong, thick accent, and sometimes with the influence of the regional variety in the grammar and syntax. And then you have the most elevated version, which is Standard Italian. How many people speak it? It's really a spectrum at that point. There will be people that when they speak, you can tell they're from a certain area, but it's not too strong. It's only a little bit. So maybe we could say that they speak 80% or 85% standard. You'll have people that, as I say, speak 50%, 40% standard. But then you do have people that speak 100% standard. It's just that it's very rare because you need to be trained in order to do it pretty much. And depending on each region, we'll have to modify the way we open and close vowels, for instance, the way we double our consonants or the way we don't. All of that needs to change if you want to speak standard and actually learn how it's done, because the difference is that standard follows a set of rules that is based on the Latin roots and justifications. Perhaps I'll make a dedicated video.
Even more so, however, the prohibition of Demotic in government settings resulted in a long-standing dispute known as the Greek language question, with left-wing movements advocating for the use of Demotic and right-wing movements championing Kasarevosa. Demotic eventually became the official language of Greece in 1975.
I had no idea about that, and my dogs are going nuts. I wonder if they're left-wingers or right-wingers at this point. Nah, my dogs are moderates, just like me.
After the military dictatorship ended, but during that century and a half had absorbed many different words and grammar rules from Kasarevosa, forming what is today known as Standard Modern Greek. Finally,
which sounds really nice. Okay, so he is going into the Turkish. As I say, I'm going to leave this entire section for you to go and check out and watch the original video. I did appreciate this video. I disagreed on a few points, but then again, those are things that are really, really easy to get wrong. So I'm not mad or anything, and I think the channel is nice. I will check him out, and definitely I'm gonna look at that video where he talks about the historical aspects of the fragmentation of Italian states. It's gonna be really fun to do. But for today, thank you very much for watching and joining Metatron's Academy. Bye.